In the early days of World War II, the United States faced a daunting challenge: how to create a vehicle small enough to maneuver through rough terrain, yet durable enough to carry soldiers, supplies, and weapons across battlefields that seemed impossible to navigate. At the time, armies around the world relied on heavy, complex vehicles that were difficult to maintain, slow to produce, and often broke down when pushed to their limits. The American military needed something radically different, a machine that could be built fast, repaired quickly, and used for virtually anything. This idea would become the Jeep, a vehicle so unassuming in design that it would later astonish German officers on the beaches of Normandy. The story begins with a simple request from the Army: a lightweight reconnaissance vehicle capable of transporting 2 soldiers and their equipment across rough terrain at speeds up to 50 miles per hour. Engineers at Willis Overland and Ford were given just over a month to design a prototype. Imagine the pressure. In the middle of a global war, the fate of millions might hinge on the performance of a small, boxy vehicle. They faced a challenge unlike any other: creating a vehicle that was not only rugged and reliable, but also simple enough that it could be mass-produced in hundreds of thousands, identical in every detail. Willis called their prototype the MA, while Ford developed the GPW, the letters standing for Government, 80-inch wheelbase, and Willis pattern. Both designs had one crucial thing in common: simplicity. The Jeep was stripped down to the essentials: 4-wheel drive, a small but powerful engine, and a chassis that could withstand punishment in mud, sand, snow, and even shallow water. Unlike the precision-engineered German vehicles, which were often fragile and difficult to repair, the Jeep was built to be disposable in the sense that it could be destroyed without halting the momentum of the army. Every part was interchangeable, every Jeep identical, and every new vehicle could roll off the assembly line faster than the enemy could destroy it. The production strategy itself was revolutionary. At Willis and Ford factories, thousands of workers labored tirelessly, often around the clock, to churn out Jeeps at a rate the world had never seen. In an era when most nations produced vehicles in the hundreds or low thousands, the United States committed to building over 600,000. This relentless pace of production is what would later earn the nickname the Arsenal of Democracy. Soldiers didn't just receive a Jeep, they received a piece of industrial power, a rolling embodiment of the might and ingenuity of a nation fully mobilized for war. Even before the Jeep ever touched a battlefield, it had already begun to change the rules of warfare. Engineers tested prototypes by driving them over hills, through rivers, and across desert sands, often intentionally pushing them to the point of breaking. The results were astonishing. Unlike many military vehicles of the time, the Jeep could be repaired almost anywhere, often with little more than a hammer and wrench. A soldier could replace a wheel, patch a radiator, or fix the transmission in the field, keeping the army moving even under the harshest conditions. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a lifeline, a tactical advantage that relied not on firepower or armor, but on mobility, adaptability, and sheer numbers. By early 1943, the Jeep had begun appearing in theaters of war across North Africa and the Pacific. Soldiers quickly discovered that it could do far more than the engineers had imagined. It could tow artillery, carry stretchers, transport commanders, and even serve as a mobile communications hub. In every battle, from the sands of Tunisia to the jungles of Guadalcanal, the Jeep proved that small, rugged, and abundant vehicles could outperform heavier, more complicated machines. Its speed and versatility allowed troops to outmaneuver the enemy, strike quickly, and maintain supply lines in situations where larger vehicles would have become immobile and vulnerable. What made the Jeep particularly terrifying to the Germans, though, was not any single battle or mission. It was the realization of what these small vehicles represented: an unstoppable industrial machine. For every Jeep lost to enemy fire, another one was ready to take its place. The Germans, who prided themselves on precision engineering and tactical efficiency, were used to winning through skill, planning, and technology. They had never faced a war where sheer production power could overwhelm strategy. Each Jeep landing in Europe was a reminder that the United States could produce more than the enemy could destroy, a concept that would soon shake German confidence to its core. As production accelerated, the Jeep also became a symbol of hope and resilience for the Allied troops. Soldiers painted their Jeeps, personalized them with names and slogans, and relied on them for every mission, big or small. Across battlefields spanning continents, the Jeep represented a lifeline, a reminder that American ingenuity and determination could deliver victory in even the most dire circumstances. By the time the planning for D-Day was underway, the Jeep was no longer just a vehicle, it was an idea, a small, seemingly ordinary machine that in numbers and versatility could change the outcome of the war itself. Even today, the story of the Jeep's creation and its rise to prominence remains one of the most fascinating examples of industrial innovation during wartime. It reminds us that sometimes the smallest tools, when designed smartly, produced abundantly, and used creatively, can have the largest impact. On June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy would provide the world with a dramatic proof of that fact. But before the soldiers landed, before the first shots were fired, the Jeep had already prepared the stage, silently and efficiently, for one of the greatest demonstrations of industrial power in history. Every bolt, every tire, every engine that rolled off the assembly line was a small but crucial part of a machine bigger than any single soldier or tank, a machine capable of redefining the course of World War II.
The Jeep had proven itself in the hands of soldiers, but its true power was not just in its ability to traverse mud, sand, and rocky terrain. Its real strength lay in numbers, in the sheer scale at which it could be produced. While German factories focused on precision engineering and craftsmanship, the United States had embraced a radically different philosophy: build more than the enemy can destroy, and build it fast. This approach turned vehicles like the Jeep from simple machines into weapons of industrial warfare. In factories across the Midwest, thousands of workers, men and women, young and old, veterans and those new to industry, labored tirelessly to bring these designs to life. Every day, conveyor belts carried frames, engines, tires, and suspension parts toward final assembly. The hum of machines, the clatter of hammers, and the roar of presses created a rhythm that defined a nation at war. Unlike most European manufacturers who were limited by smaller factories and more intricate production methods, American plants embraced standardization. Every Jeep, whether it came from Willys or Ford, was essentially identical. Any part could be replaced by another from a different factory anywhere in the world in hours rather than days. This was more than efficiency, it was a revolution in logistics. With thousands of identical vehicles rolling off the assembly lines, the Army could plan operations knowing they would have the resources to sustain momentum. Troops could rely on a constant flow of Jeeps, fuel, and spare parts, confident that no obstacle would halt their advance. While German commanders worried about every tank lost, every truck destroyed, the Allies could simply replace losses as if they were minor inconveniences. The math was terrifying in its simplicity. Quantity, reliability, and speed could outmatch skill and firepower. By 1943, the numbers were staggering. Willys Overland alone had produced tens of thousands of Jeeps, and Ford was on pace to match them. Together, they were producing over 1,000 vehicles every single day. Over 600,000 Jeeps would eventually be manufactured during the war, each one a testament to America's ability to mobilize its entire society for the purpose of victory. For the German High Command, the realization of this scale would be shocking. They had invested in elaborate engineering marvels, but now they faced an army with limitless replacement parts, endless supply lines, and a vehicle small enough to evade artillery, yet powerful enough to carry entire squads. The logistics behind this production effort were equally impressive. Steel from the Midwest became chassis frames, engines from Detroit powered the vehicles, and tires from Akron rolled them across assembly floors and onto transport ships. Each Jeep was then carefully crated, shipped to ports on both coasts, and loaded onto transport ships bound for Europe and the Pacific. The orchestration required was unprecedented. It was not just a vehicle being sent into battle, it was a moving embodiment of American industrial might. Soldiers who received a Jeep overseas were getting a machine that had traveled thousands of miles and survived the logistical gauntlet, ready to perform under any condition. This industrial momentum had strategic consequences. In Europe, the German army was calculating how to hold territory and anticipate Allied moves, but they could not account for the volume and speed of American reinforcements. One Jeep lost in a firefight was quickly replaced, while thousands more were arriving on the beaches of Normandy, ready to transport troops, tow artillery, or relay communications. The Americans had created a feedback loop of production and deployment that the Germans could not neither disrupt nor match. For German officers, witnessing this was like staring at a tide they could not stop, an endless wave of machines and men powered by factories, railways, and ports rather than tactics alone. The Jeep also changed how the Allies thought about mobility and strategy. Generals could plan operations that previously would have seemed impossible, confident that supply lines could keep pace with advances. Entire divisions could move rapidly across countryside that would have bogged down heavier vehicles. Reconnaissance, medical evacuation, and communication all became more efficient thanks to the simplicity and abundance of the Jeep. In many ways, the vehicle reshaped the very concept of warfare, turning speed and flexibility into decisive advantages. Meanwhile, the people behind the machines were making history quietly, often unnoticed. Women in factories riveted frames, installed engines, and tested vehicles, contributing as much to the war effort as soldiers on the front lines. Children and teenagers sometimes carried parts from one station to another. Every tire mounted, every radiator bolted, and every engine tested brought the Allies one step closer to victory. The Jeep was not just a military asset, it was the embodiment of an entire nation united in purpose, where industry itself became a weapon. By the time the first Jeeps began rolling off the landing ships for D-Day, they were more than vehicles, they were a symbol of unstoppable momentum. German officers, trained to respect skill, precision, and superior engineering, could hardly grasp that victory could be determined by numbers, speed, and the clever application of industrial power. The Jeep, small and rugged, was proof that America had mastered this art. Each one arriving in Europe reminded the enemy that no single act of sabotage, ambush, or tactical brilliance could stop the overwhelming tide of machines and men. It was not just a vehicle, it was an idea, a rolling testament to the power of production, preparation, and perseverance.
June 6, 1944, dawned over the beaches of Normandy, and with it came a sight that German officers would never forget. Across the gray, churning waters, landing ships carried not just soldiers, but the embodiment of American industrial might, the Jeep. Small, rugged, and seemingly ordinary, these vehicles began rolling off the ramps and onto Utah Beach in endless columns. For the Germans, it was a shock that went far beyond strategy or firepower. They had expected tanks, artillery, and infantry, but the sheer scale of these tiny vehicles, moving with speed and precision, was something they had never seen before. The first Jeeps touched the sand and immediately proved their worth. Unlike heavier vehicles, which often became bogged down in the wet dunes or hit obstacles in the form of hedgerows, the Jeep charged forward, weaving between craters and barbed wire, carrying troops and equipment where larger vehicles could not. Soldiers clung to them, rifles ready, eyes scanning for enemy fire. Medics used them to transport wounded men from the chaos of the beach to field hospitals, while officers relied on them for rapid communication between units. Each Jeep was a mobile command post, a lifeline, and a tactical tool, all rolled into one small frame. For the Germans watching from bunkers and defensive positions, the experience was bewildering. They had trained to anticipate tanks and artillery, to calculate the impact of heavy armored vehicles and slow-moving transport, but the Jeep defied expectations. Columns of these four-wheel drive vehicles seemed endless, arriving faster than they could be destroyed. Every attempt to stop them, machine gun fire, artillery shells, mines, seemed futile. The vehicles kept moving forward, over obstacles, through smoke and sand, always arriving in numbers that made the defenders realize something profound. They were not just facing soldiers, they were facing an industrial force that could outproduce and outlast them. The impact on German morale was immediate and severe. Officers whispered among themselves, noting how quickly the Americans could replace losses and maintain momentum. They had prepared for the landing, fortified their positions, and counted on their superior engineering to hold the line. Yet now, watching Jeep after Jeep roll onto the beach, they understood that precision engineering and careful planning were no match for sheer numbers and relentless production. One German officer later remarked, in disbelief, that the Americans had brought not just an army, but a machine that could never be stopped, a force built on factories rather than tactics. The versatility of the Jeep was staggering. Within hours of the landing, they were transporting artillery to firing positions, towing supply trailers loaded with ammunition, and carrying reconnaissance teams into areas previously inaccessible to larger vehicles. Some Jeeps were fitted with radios, relaying crucial information back to command posts, while others carried stretcher teams to evacuate the wounded. The vehicles moved constantly, seamlessly blending the roles of transport, command, and combat support. Their small size allowed them to maneuver through the chaotic terrain of the beach and inland roads, climbing over rubble and navigating bombed-out streets that would have stopped larger vehicles in their tracks. Soldiers quickly adapted to the capabilities of the Jeep, improvising solutions to battlefield problems with remarkable speed. Engineers and drivers modified vehicles to carry more equipment, add makeshift armor, or mount light weapons. Every Jeep became a testament to American ingenuity, a rolling platform for solving the immediate challenges of warfare. Their reliability allowed units to move faster than ever before, coordinating attacks, evacuating casualties, and supplying frontline troops with an efficiency the Germans could not counter. Each Jeep was a small, mobile symbol of the industrial power that backed every soldier, a reminder that no single defensive line could stop an army backed by an entire nation. As the hours passed, the Germans on the beach realized the terrifying truth. No matter how many vehicles they destroyed, more would arrive. The flow of Jeeps was like a river that could not be dammed, a visual confirmation of the unmatched scale of American production. Soldiers on the front lines saw Jeeps everywhere, weaving through sand, carrying ammunition, evacuating the injured, and delivering orders. The Jeep was not just a vehicle, it had become the lifeblood of the invasion, the mechanism that allowed the Allies to sustain momentum, adapt to battlefield conditions, and overwhelm fortified positions with speed and flexibility. By midday, the psychological impact on the German defenders was profound. Commanders who had expected to slow the invasion with fortifications and firepower now faced an unstoppable tide of men and machines. The Jeep was a small, seemingly insignificant vehicle, yet it had transformed the landing into a demonstration of industrial dominance. It was no longer a question of tactics or bravery. It was a realization that America's factories had given their soldiers an advantage that could not be neutralized by strategy alone. The landing, chaotic and bloody as it was, showed that logistical mastery and production power could tip the balance of war in ways traditional weapons could not. Every time a jeep crested a dune or slipped past a destroyed barrier, German soldiers were forced to reckon with the limits of their engineering and the overwhelming capacity of the Allied war machine. What made the vehicle particularly effective was not any single feature, but the combination of mobility, versatility, and mass. One Jeep could do what used to require multiple specialized vehicles, and hundreds of them could achieve what might have taken an entire division in previous wars. The Germans had underestimated the impact of industrial scale and adaptability, and on the sands of Utah Beach, that miscalculation became painfully clear. By the end of the first day, the beachhead was secured, and the Jeep had earned its place in history. Soldiers called it the workhorse of victory, a vehicle that was simple, reliable, and infinitely adaptable. German officers would carry the memory of that day for the rest of the war, remembering the endless columns, the speed, and the unstoppable nature of this small machine. It was not guns, tanks, or strategy alone that determined the outcome. It was the combination of production, design, and human ingenuity that allowed a tiny four-wheel drive vehicle to shock an entire army and lay the foundation for the liberation of Europe. The Jeep, arriving quietly and efficiently, had done what few could have imagined. It had bridged the gap between industry and battlefield, turning factories into weapons, workers into force multipliers, and small vehicles into instruments of war. On D-Day, the little Jeep proved that sometimes the smallest tools, when deployed at the right scale, could change the course of history. It was rugged, unassuming, and seemingly ordinary, but by the end of that day, it had become legendary, a symbol of American ingenuity, resilience, and unstoppable industrial power. After the beaches of Normandy were secured, the Allied advance into occupied France relied on a surprising hero, the Jeep. What had seemed like a small, simple vehicle on D-Day now revealed its true impact on the course of the war. Far from just a mode of transport, the Jeep became the lifeblood of the Allied army, ensuring that troops, supplies, and artillery could move faster and more efficiently than the Germans had ever anticipated. The speed and versatility of these vehicles allowed American forces to maintain pressure across multiple fronts, stretching German defenses to the breaking point. In the weeks following D-Day, German forces were constantly forced to retreat, not simply because of superior firepower, but because they could not match the mobility of the Allies. Roads once thought impassable for mechanized units were now navigable thanks to the Jeep. Supply convoys rolled through narrow lanes, dirt paths, and bombed-out streets, carrying everything from ammunition and rations to fuel and medical supplies. Infantry units could advance more rapidly than ever before, supported by jeeps that carried light artillery pieces and reconnaissance teams. The Germans were confronted with a terrifying realization. Every defensive position they established could be bypassed or overwhelmed simply because the Allies could outmaneuver them at every turn. Reconnaissance was another area where the Jeep proved decisive. Small, fast, and agile, Jeeps allowed scouts to move ahead of the main forces, mapping enemy positions, reporting back movements, and coordinating artillery strikes. Where larger vehicles or tanks would have been easily spotted and targeted, the Jeep could dart through terrain almost unnoticed, giving the Allies an almost unfair advantage in situational awareness. This mobility meant that decisions could be made more quickly, attacks coordinated more efficiently, and reinforcements dispatched to critical points faster than the Germans could respond. The Jeep's ability to tow light artillery also changed the dynamics of battlefield engagement. Anti-tank guns, mortars, and other artillery pieces could be repositioned in minutes rather than hours, allowing American units to respond to German counterattacks with unprecedented speed. In battles across Normandy and later in the liberation of France, jeeps were often seen pulling weapons through terrain that would have trapped traditional trucks or half-tracks. Soldiers learned to rely on them not just for movement, but for tactical superiority, using their mobility to strike, retreat, and redeploy in ways that frustrated even the most experienced German commanders. German troops began to notice a pattern. Everywhere the Jeep went, the Americans seemed unstoppable. Commanders on the front lines reported entire German positions being outflanked or cut off, not by overwhelming numbers of soldiers, but by the speed and coordination enabled by these vehicles. The mass production of the Jeep meant that losses could be replaced almost instantly. A destroyed vehicle was never a permanent setback. New Jeeps arrived regularly, keeping supply lines intact and units mobile. This constant flow of reinforcements and logistical support created a sense of inevitability on the battlefield. German forces were fighting an army that could not be slowed, an industrial machine moving with a precision and consistency they could not match. In addition to mobility and logistics, the Jeep became a symbol of adaptability. Soldiers learned to modify their vehicles for a variety of purposes. Some were fitted with machine guns, others converted into field ambulances, and still others used to carry engineers, explosives, and reconnaissance equipment. This versatility meant that a single vehicle could serve multiple roles in combat, reducing the need for specialized machines and allowing units to operate more independently. The Jeep's simple design made field repairs quick and efficient, ensuring that no unit was ever stranded for long. In a war where speed and flexibility were increasingly decisive, this adaptability gave the Allies a constant edge. The psychological impact on German forces cannot be overstated. Officers who had relied on the superiority of tanks and heavy equipment found themselves constantly outmaneuvered by small, nimble vehicles. Every time a column of Jeeps appeared on the horizon, carrying artillery, troops, or supplies, it was a reminder that no fortification, no ambush, and no counterattack could stop the Americans' relentless advance. German morale began to falter as they realized that the technological sophistication of their vehicles was no longer sufficient. The war was no longer being won by engineering alone. It was being won by numbers, logistics, and the clever application of industrial power. One particularly striking example occurred during the breakout from Normandy in Operation Cobra. American forces relied heavily on Jeeps to transport artillery, ammunition, and communication teams across bombed-out roads and fields. The Germans, expecting slower advances, were caught off guard by the speed of the Allied push. Entire divisions were forced to retreat, abandoning positions and equipment, as the mobility provided by the Jeep allowed the Allies to strike deeper into occupied territory than previously thought possible. These victories were not simply tactical, they were strategic, demonstrating that the Jeep had become an instrument capable of reshaping entire campaigns. By the time the Allies crossed the Seine and pushed toward the German border, the Jeep had proven itself indispensable. Its contributions extended far beyond transporting troops or towing artillery. It had become a symbol of American ingenuity, a tool that allowed a nation's industrial power to manifest on the battlefield in real time. German officers understood that the war was being lost not just in battles, but in the factories, assembly lines, and supply chains that produced these vehicles in staggering numbers. The Jeep had transformed the American Army into a force that was faster, more flexible, and more resilient than anything the Germans could counter with their existing resources. The breaking of the German war machine was a combination of strategy, bravery, and industrial ingenuity, but the Jeep stood at the center of it all. Small, rugged, and seemingly ordinary, it had enabled a logistical and tactical advantage that no amount of planning or engineering could overcome. By keeping soldiers supplied, mobile, and adaptable, the Jeep allowed the Allies to maintain relentless pressure across multiple fronts, forcing German forces into retreat after retreat. In the story of World War II, it became clear that victory was not just about tanks, planes, or bombs. It was about the clever application of resources, the relentless flow of production, and the small, unassuming vehicles that tied it all together. When soldiers of the German army looked back on those months, many recalled the Jeep with a mix of awe and fear. It was a vehicle they had underestimated, a machine that appeared ordinary but functioned as a force multiplier in ways they could not counter. From Normandy to the liberation of France, the Jeep had proven that speed, versatility, and industrial scale could defeat even the most experienced and heavily armed opponents. It was, in every sense, a vehicle that helped break the German war machine, reshaping the battlefield and leaving an indelible mark on history.
By the time World War II drew to a close, the Jeep had become more than just a vehicle. It had transformed from a small, rugged machine into an enduring symbol of American ingenuity, industrial power, and tactical flexibility. Soldiers who had relied on its strength and versatility remembered it as a lifeline on the battlefield, while commanders saw it as a force multiplier that allowed armies to move faster, fight harder, and sustain operations over vast distances. The Jeep had not just participated in the war, it had shaped it. Its impact was first and most visible on the front lines. From the beaches of Normandy to the streets of liberated French towns, Jeeps carried troops, supplies, and artillery across terrain that would have slowed or stopped heavier vehicles. They were used for reconnaissance missions that outmaneuvered German defenses, for evacuating wounded soldiers under fire, and for maintaining communication across chaotic battlefields. Each Jeep, small and unassuming, enabled thousands of acts of courage, efficiency, and innovation. In countless operations, soldiers improvised modifications, mounting machine guns, adding stretchers, or creating mobile command posts, proving that this humble vehicle could adapt to virtually any role. Beyond its battlefield performance, the Jeep embodied a profound lesson in industrial strategy. While German engineers had produced exceptional vehicles in smaller numbers, the Americans demonstrated that production scale, standardization, and speed could outweigh technical sophistication alone. Factories in Detroit, Toledo, and elsewhere churned out Jeeps at a pace the world had never seen. Tens of thousands of vehicles were produced each month, and every lost vehicle could be replaced almost immediately. This relentless flow of replacements and reinforcements turned the tide of war. German forces, no matter how skilled or disciplined, could not counter an army backed by an unstoppable industrial engine. The Jeep, in essence, became the physical manifestation of the arsenal of democracy. After the war, the Jeep's influence did not fade. Millions of surplus vehicles were shipped across Europe, Asia, and beyond, helping rebuild infrastructure, assist in humanitarian efforts, and even influence civilian vehicle design. Its simple, rugged design became a blueprint for utility vehicles around the world. In every theater of conflict that followed, from Korea to Vietnam, and even into modern military logistics, the Jeep's principles, versatility, durability, and mass producibility remained central to military planning. Engineers and strategists alike studied how a small, adaptable vehicle could serve as the backbone of mobility and supply, proving that innovation often comes not from complexity, but from clever, practical solutions that can be deployed at scale. The cultural legacy of the Jeep was also remarkable. Soldiers painted names, slogans, and symbols on the vehicles, giving them personalities and identities that transcended metal and rubber. The Jeep became a trusted companion, a source of morale, and in some ways a symbol of hope amid the chaos of war. Veterans would recall that no matter the danger, no matter the obstacles, the Jeep could carry them forward, carrying not just soldiers, but the promise of victory. It became an icon representing the ingenuity, resourcefulness, and determination of the American people. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the Jeep lies in its role as a testament to how industrial power and innovation can shape history. It reminds us that wars are not won solely by bravery, tactics, or firepower,
but by logistics, production, and the ability to adapt on the fly. On D-Day and in the campaigns that followed, the Jeep was a small, visible proof of this principle. It arrived quietly, rolled into battle, and silently changed the calculus of warfare. German officers who had once relied on technological superiority found themselves facing a force whose strength lay in numbers, mobility, and the clever application of industrial might. Even decades later, the Jeep remains an enduring symbol of this approach. Its design has influenced countless military and civilian vehicles, from the rugged 4x4s of the post-war era to modern utility vehicles used in disaster relief and off-road exploration. The lessons of mobility, versatility, and mass producibility remain central to military planning today, proving that the principles demonstrated by a small army vehicle in the 1940s continued to shape engineering and strategy in the 21st century. The story of the Jeep also serves as a reminder of the people behind the machines. The engineers who designed it, the factory workers who built it, and the soldiers who depended on it all played essential roles in a larger story of collaboration, ingenuity, and perseverance. Together, they transformed a simple vehicle into a weapon of war, a tool of liberation, and a symbol of the ability of a nation to harness industry for a greater purpose. The Jeep's legacy is not merely mechanical, it is human. It represents the connection between design, production, and action, a small vehicle with an outsized impact. Ultimately, the Jeep showed the world that even the simplest innovations, when executed with intelligence, speed, and scale, can alter the course of history. It broke the German war machine, facilitated rapid advances across Europe, and became a symbol of hope and ingenuity for generations to come. From the beaches of Normandy to the post-war rebuilding of nations, the Jeep proved that size is not always the measure of power, and that a well-designed, widely produced tool can change the fate of millions. In the annals of World War II, few machines have earned as enduring a place as the Jeep. Humble, unassuming, yet indispensable. A true hero on four wheels.